Hi guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Amanda and I head up the marketing team at Ergo Pouch. We've recently launched our new range of cocoon swaddle bags and jersey bags that are specially designed to support families who have a child who's been recently or diagnosed with developmental dysplasia of the hip. We have an amazing panel of parents here today who have all joined us. They're either currently going through the experience of hip dysplasia, or they have been through it and their child is now out of the brace. Ergo Pouch are really keen to better understand that journey and how that impacts sleep. And we're so grateful for you all being here today. So we're going to ask some questions and just hear your stories really about your journey with DDH. So to get started, I'm going to go over to Claire. So Claire, Harry is 8 months old now. I'm interested to know, how much did you know about hip dysplasia before Harry was diagnosed? Oh, you're on mute, Claire. Just wanna, that's okay.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know anything about hip dysplasia. It was all very foreign to me. I'm also a registered nurse and working in emergency departments, and I hadn't seen a brace, or it wasn't even in my vocab, didn't know anything about it. So when Harry was diagnosed, that was really confronting and overwhelming. Because I felt as though that's something that I should know about, but hadn't been exposed to it at all. So I did lots of Googling, which is probably the worst thing you can do, and tried to familiarise myself as much as possible. I also didn't know of anyone at the going through the same thing, so no one was able to give me experiences or tell me the do's and don'ts of hip dysplasia.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. I knew nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Zoe, you're quite new into your journey. So with Nate, you're 3 weeks in. How did you find out about Nate's hip dysplasia, and what were some of the symptoms that were brought up before he was diagnosed?
Yeah, so we found out during a routine maternal child health nurse appointment, which, every appointment I'd been to, leg crease check was done, and nothing had come up. And it was at the 7-month appointment where the nurse noticed that there was some uneven creases in Nate's legs. She was quite surprised that it hadn't really presented earlier on. So in her mind, she didn't necessarily think that there could be something wrong, or the chances were quite low. But yeah, she just said to me to go and see my GP and get her opinion. And then from there, we went and had x-rays done, which revealed a slight dysplasia in the right hip. So it was a bit of a shock, to be honest, especially being 7 months old. I thought it was kind of something that was picked up or obvious earlier on. So it's been hard, and especially considering he's, quite mobile too. We kind of felt, that could hinder his development a little bit in terms of movement. But so far, so good. He's in the rhino brace, so he's kind of taken it in his stride, and nothing seems to be slowing him down. So
amazing. Yeah. Great to hear. Thank you. So Jess, you've got Elliot, little Lottie, who's been diagnosed for about 6 weeks now. So who initially diagnosed Lottie's hip dysplasia, and what kind of feelings did that diagnosis bring up for you?
Yeah, so the doctor on discharge from the hospital noticed a slight click in her left hip, and said, it could be nothing, wait 6 weeks and then have a visit with a pediatrician. So we actually went a whole 6 weeks without knowing that she had hip dysplasia. So the pediatrician diagnosed her, and my reaction to that was just insane mum guilt. I think I cried for the whole day. So at 6 weeks, we had a real rhythm to things. We had our breastfeeding sorted and our sleeping. We had a bit of a routine, and this just threw everything out for us completely. So there was definitely a few rough days there. But for Lottie herself, didn't even notice it. She could not have cared less, which was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jess. So we have somebody else who's quite new into their journey. So Ali, Bronte is quite recently diagnosed, around 1.5 weeks into your journey. When Bronte got diagnosed, was there a clear treatment plan that was outlined for you? Was it kind of confusing to think about what the kind of future would bring now that you were just starting out on your journey?
Yeah, sure. So I was very similar to Zoe in our diagnosis. All the routine checks, etc. But when we finally got a chance, she had the only indication for us was the fat lines. She's a chunky baby. They weren't straight. I also have a history. But there was not really a clear outline on what would happen. I was told after an x-ray and an ultrasound that I would need to go to a specialist in Sydney. I'm in Goulburn in New South Wales. Yeah, they would then check and make sure there. We did that, and they just said, okay, she's 6 months old, so let's assume she'll be in a rhino brace. Let's assume that it will be, for worst case scenario, 6 months. But looking online and listening to stories today, I'm not going to hang my hat on that one. I think there might be other things at play that might take it longer than that. But it's rhino brace. That's the simplest diagnosis for us. Next time I go in is in 2 months. I don't know how normal that is. Again, 1.5 weeks of knowledge.
Yeah. I guess I might just open this next question up to the group then. Is that quite typical, what Ali's describing there, that you kind of just take it appointment by appointment, or it is? I'm seeing a lot of nodding there. Yeah, okay. And that's quite, I guess that's quite confronting in itself, and not really knowing what the next, 3, 6, 9, 12 months might look like. Yeah.
Absolutely is.
Yeah.
No idea. Lots of change for a very unknown period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jade, you've had 2 daughters who have had developmental dysplasia of the hip. So your eldest daughter, who's now 4, and most recently Maggie, 5.5 months.
Yeah.
I guess having had 2 children with the condition, can you share with us what resources and support were available to you after the diagnosis of your first versus what you're finding in terms of resource and support now that you've been through the journey and have started with your second?
So when my first daughter was diagnosed, we're right down on the far south coast, like 7 hours from Sydney, coastal town. Didn't know what hip dysplasia was. No one really knew in the town what it was. Never seen a baby with a brace. So I was a new mum. She was my first daughter, sent home, off you go. She's got clicky hips. She'll go to Sydney soon, and that's kind of it. It was quite sad because there was nothing down here for that. So I turned to Facebook and I thought I'll Google and see what I can find, and then led me to amazing support groups online. I just had to ask questions. Like our first daughter was in a spiker cast, and what things could help, and that was really good. But unfortunately in the area, like resource wise, no one really knew. No one could give me any advice, or I had no one to go to unless I went all the way to Sydney to ask a question. Like it was, it was quite hard. And it's still pretty much the same now, like down here. I mean, Maggie's my second, so I'm not a pro, but I feel like I'm a bit armed than I was before. But yeah, I feel there needs to be more resources. Just education for people especially not in big towns, but also rural as well.
Yes.
You've got no one really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite daunting.
Yeah. Hannah, how did you find that situation with Olivia? She was diagnosed quite young. Did you have a support group of parents who were going through the same thing? Did that come later on in your journey? How was that for you?
She was diagnosed really young in the hospital. I remember frantically Googling anything and everything I could, and then similarly went down the same path of finding the Facebook support groups. And that was really the lifeline, particularly in those early days when I just had no information. I had no understanding of what the journey was going to look like for us. We didn't know anyone. There was no kind of formal support groups offered at all through the hospital or doctors, nothing like that. So it was really, there's a hip dysplasia Facebook group. And then later on, when we realised we'd have to go down the spiker route, there's a Spiker Families Australia group, which was just incredible. It was really where I got all of my support from. And then through those groups, I did actually meet someone else who is here today, Claire, who's going through the same journey. And we've since been able to connect and kind of support each other through that, which has been really great.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's actually quite surprising to hear both from Jade and Hannah that there wasn't a lot of readily available support around. We've been reading up that a developmental dysplasia of the hip, or just hip instability in general, is the most common birth abnormality. And something like 8 babies a week in Australia are diagnosed with DDH. So I am quite surprised to hear about the lack of support when it is so common. And I wonder if that contributes to some sort of stigma. A lot of you have kind of been saying you felt some guilt that you didn't know about it, or that, when your child was first diagnosed, uncertainty around it. And I guess there might be a little bit of cause and effect there with not having a lot of availability of conversation and resources that are kind of publicly out there. So, Sally, did you find, so Parker's now out of his brace, but did you find that there were particularly useful or perhaps unhelpful online tools, media, brands, when Parker was in his brace? What was your experience with kind of support that was out there?
Yeah, well, my story is very similar to the other girls, where I was unaware of anything to do with the condition when Parker was diagnosed. On top of that, Parker was diagnosed right in the middle of the Melbourne COVID lockdown. So that made reaching out for support even more difficult. So we were very much in an online bubble for those 3 months. Parker was in his brace pretty much the entire lockdown. So even hospital visits were restrictive. I had to go in on my own. The Facebook online support group was probably the most helpful resource for myself. Just being able to reach out to other mums and openly ask questions on a forum that's non-judgmental. Everybody's going through it or has been through it. And really, that was probably the most valuable source of support and information that I was able to access during that time. I wouldn't say that there's too much unhelpful information out there. I think everybody's puts their arms around each other and just supports everyone, and is upcoming and upfront with information that no question is a silly question online. There's always someone that's been there and done that and is willing to jump in and support. And the community itself is just incredibly generous. There's so many women, mothers and fathers that have been through it and have tools like bean bags and speaker tables and things like that their child has used, and they're willing to pass on to another family free of charge, including sleeping bags and things like that. It's just a really nice community. I wouldn't say that there's too much unhelpful information out there, because it seems like the Facebook support group is kind of the only support group that we have. Okay, great. No, that's really great to hear. And has everybody else generally found the same thing with online support groups, that they've been very welcoming? And great. So Peter, Giselle's now out of her brace. We met Giselle on our photo shoot.
Yes.
Can you talk us through how her time in the brace might have impacted any developmental milestones associated with sleep while she was wearing it, and including what happened with sleep when the brace came off, as well as when it went on?
Well, frankly, when she got her brace put on, her sleep turned to absolute shit. It was horrible. They obviously said there might be some adjustments. They reassure you that they're not in pain. Obviously, no one knows that, but it is a really big adjustment for everyone. We had a snoo bassinet that she fit very well in initially. When her legs were put in that frog position, they were touching the ends. She didn't fit in any of the sleeping bags that came with the snoo, and I couldn't find any sleeping bag to put her in that would actually clip in. And then, of course, there comes the extra layer of not wanting them to be in an unsafe sleep environment. So I didn't want to put blankets on her, and it was really scary initially what to do. She, for nearly 2 weeks, woke up probably every 45 minutes to every 2 hours overnight, just screaming because she just couldn't get comfortable. She was probably cold, and we just didn't know what to do. So it was hellish for a while. It did get better. So to any of the other mums that are listening, sorry, it will get better. It doesn't stay that way. And then really we've kind of forgot about it for a while. Like over the last few months, she did really well. When it came off, there was a slight adjustment, but not really. I think the biggest adjustment for her is that she realised that she could roll. So that was just that sleep time turned into playtime, and that was a whole nother ball game that we had to deal with.
Yeah. Did she start rolling almost immediately after the brace came off, or was there
because she had 1 hour out for 2 months, she learnt to roll during that time.
Okay, yeah.
She'd have her bath time and then she'd roll around beforehand. But then when it was off 24 hours a day, it took her maybe a couple of weeks to realise she just still slept in that frog position like the brace was still on. But then once she knew, there's no stopping her, and there's still no stopping her at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And did you find you had to buy new sleeping bags once the brace came off? Was it suddenly,
yes,
okay, now we have a whole new setup to cater to?
Yes, because she was in the brace for 5 months. So it was a long period of time and a big growth period. So I had to buy bigger sizes that continuously would accommodate her brace and also her growth. And then going through different changes of season as well. I don't know how many sleeping bags all the other mums have, but I think we have every tog to accommodate for every weather scenario, especially in Melbourne. It's constantly changing. And we have now moved on to the sleep suits that you have, because our orthopaedic surgeon recommended that you still continue to give them as much room as possible. So the standard sleeping bags just didn't have enough room. She still sleeps with her legs quite far spread apart. So at least with the sleep suits, she's not restricted at all, and it gives her that freedom of movement.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good to know. Thank you. So Jess, she's only 9 weeks old. Did you have a similar situation there that Peter described with kind of, being in the bassinet, or prematurely had to move from a bassinet to a cot to accommodate the brace? How did it work for you?
Yeah, so we were actually quite lucky in terms that Lottie still fits in her bassinet, but just. So we found that when we got her home, that was one thing, is she'd always slept in a sleeping bag, and that just wasn't a possibility for us. So we had to revert back to swaddling with a blanket and leaving the bottom of it quite loose, which sort of made us a bit panicky about her kicking her legs and stuff. So I think in terms of sleep, we were pretty similar with the waking up and sort of just checking on her. But she is very close to needing to move into her cot, which is about a month earlier than I was hoping to have to do. And that's purely because she's not going to fit with her legs in that frog position.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So Claire, when Harry was diagnosed, you've kind of explained that in the initial diagnosis, you hadn't heard of hip dysplasia. You had a baptism of fire in finding out about it. But were you told by pediatrician, maternal child health nurse, anyone, how that might impact sleep and what adjustments you might need to make to a sleep routine? Was that something that was explained up front?
No, we didn't get told anything. And I don't think any of these, the orthopaedic surgeon, the pediatrician, the child health nurse, I don't think that they also knew. I mean, they personally probably haven't had any children in their house going through that, so they probably don't know. But we weren't told anything, and we're in the same position as all the other girls. We, Harry didn't fit in a sleeping bag. There were the love to dream swaddles, but Harry didn't like to have his arms up, so that made it quite tricky. And just the thought of trying to abide by the SIDS regulations, that was overwhelming. So the Facebook group provided most of my support, along with Hannah, who mentioned that we're friends as well, to roll up a little towel under their legs to try and make them comfortable. But it was just a process of elimination and figuring out what worked for us, really. There's no little handbook or anything, which made it really tricky, because every night and every day was different until you just mastered what worked for you.
Yes, yeah. I found the same thing, actually. I went on, big Google research and trying to find a handbook on how to sleep babies with DDH, and I could not find anything either. So again, I am also surprised that a medical profession expert didn't have those resources to give to parents. So that's really insightful. Thank you. So Zoe, with Nate, did you research product, to make life easier? What kind of product did you find, regardless of whether it was sleep related or not?
Product wise, it was probably more the sleep, looking for the sleeping bags. I did have a few pouches and sleeping bags that I had recently purchased, in that next size for him, but they obviously, with the rhino brace and him being so frog, they weren't big enough. So it was a bit of a mad rush in terms of finding something for him, because a lot of the stores don't stock them. They're all online purchases, and we, with our appointment, weren't really expecting him to come home with a brace, so we were kind of a bit left in the lurch as to what to do. So it was a lot of what the girls have said, the swaddling with, light blankets, just to keep him secure, or to feel secure, and to keep that consistency in his sleep associations, I suppose. But yeah, it was just a lot of Googling, really. And there's not a whole lot out there I didn't find. So I'm glad that you guys have launched your products, because it'd be a big help to a lot of mums, definitely. But yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. And interesting to know that a lot of stores just don't have the product either, that it's very much an online thing, so you have to wait for the delivery and all that kind of thing. But that's really helpful to know.
And could I just add to that, Amanda, just with the stores not having things and what everyone said, I don't know if you know, but when you go to that initial appointment at the hospital or with your surgeon, they are usually braced that day. So often you go, you have your x-ray or you have your ultrasound, you find out that they have it, and then they get put in a brace immediately. So you don't have any time to prepare.
Right.
So you can't, and you can't go to the shops and quickly pick up something because it just isn't there. And we were also in Melbourne during the lockdown, so mail took weeks to arrive. So having products that are available in store, because you need it immediately. You go to that hospital thinking you might have a sit down and an explanation of what's occurring. I didn't expect that we'd go home immediately with a brace. And that's, from my experience, what happens to nearly everyone.
Yeah. Okay. I can see everybody nodding. There's lots of nodding going on there.
As well. Like I did exactly what Peter said. It was like, we went to the appointment and the brace was put on and you were sent home, and that was that. So it was a lot of ringing around too to stores to see whether by chance that anyone had, a sleeping bag available in stock that they could provide. And it was quite slim. It was very lucky. I did manage to get one in store that I don't think probably should have been there, but it's a big stress to add, in the day of being told that your child needs the brace, to then thinking, well, how am I as a mum going to, make sure that they're okay? Because it was quite stressful.
Very overwhelming. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay, Hannah, what other sources of information did you turn to from a sleep perspective? We've heard a little bit about, not getting a lot of information from medical professionals, the Facebook group that being very helpful. Was there anything else you found in your experience surrounding sleep?
Oh, not really. There wasn't a lot of information out there. There's the Hip Dysplasia Australia website. Has a little bit of information on it and sells some products too, so you can get online sleeping bags and things, which helped a little bit, but it was pretty tough navigating the sleep, particularly in a healthy and safe way. I think that was probably the biggest challenge to start with, because SIDS is such a huge fear, and we're all taught, from our very first experience with finding out that we're pregnant about what the risks are there. And then moving into a world where we might have to use blankets because we can't find a sleep bag, or we have to prop them up with pillows or towels. When my daughter was in a spiker, we had to tilt the cot. So we had to put a pillow under the sheet and a pillow under her legs. And then we also had to move her around a little bit so that she didn't develop any pressure sores. So all of that kind of stuff was just really hard to marry with, the safe sleep guidelines. And there just isn't any information out there. So, the best that we could do was just do what was the safest that we could at that time. If it meant not necessarily following those SIDS safe sleep guidelines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Sally, with Parker, what kind of sleep challenges did you come across for Parker, and what kind of strategies did you have to manage them?
Well, unfortunately, I'm probably not the best candidate to ask this question, purely because when all the other girls in my mother's group were experiencing their sort of 3-month sleep regression, because of the position that Parker was in with his brace, he actually didn't go through that. Because he was sort of stuck in this little frog position. He wasn't rolling to wake himself up at night, and which some of the other girls were finding the cause of their baby's sleep regression was because they were starting to move their bodies and feel around and have that sort of developmental awareness that Parker didn't get because he was restricted. So I found that he actually skipped that sleep regression and slept right through. So it was more so, I guess, when he came out of the brace that the biggest adjustment took place, because he was right at that sort of, he was a little bit behind in development because he had been braced for 4 months. But he picked things up really quickly, and it all kind of happened all at once. And so there was a little bit of an adjustment there with moving his arms out of his sleep suit almost immediately after he came out of the brace, because he wanted to move once he realized he could. But yeah, his sleep while he was in the brace was almost unaffected, purely because he was in that sort of restricted position where he couldn't move his body to wake himself up at night. So yeah.
Okay, so that's good. Worked well for you.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, there's a positive for that.
There was a silver lining and all that.
Yeah.
Peter, while Giselle was in her brace, was there any products you wished you had but couldn't find?
I couldn't find firstly, it took a long time to find a 2.5 tog sleeping bag. I did find one eventually, and also a sleeping bag that had sleeves. So
right.
So a lot of them, the Love to Dream ones, as we've already said, were arms up. So I had to take her arms out really early on, just because she didn't like having her arms up. Really early on, actually. And then I couldn't find any sleeping bags that had the arms covered. So she was probably pretty cold for a while. Tried to put lots of layers on, but there just hasn't been a 2.5 tog or a 3.5 tog that have sleeves that we couldn't find.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good to know. Anything else unassociated with sleep with products that you wished you had during that time Giselle was in her brace?
I don't think so. There are quite a few bean bags and things that can make it more comfortable for the babies because they don't always fit in traditional rockers and they're not supposed to be in things like walkers that can affect their hips. Giselle still fit in her baby Bjorn rocker, so that was okay. But a lot of the time was spent on her back, so she was probably pretty bored for a while. I probably should have got one of those bean bags, but we didn't in the end. But we didn't have to go through the cast or the spiker to get the table, but I'm not sure if some of the other mums have found that. I've seen those advertised and they look like they're really helpful because I can imagine being stuck in a cast is difficult for them, and also for the mums and dads having to lug around all that plaster too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jade, having gone through the two, do you have any tips and tricks for sleeping with a brace that you could share with any families who are newly diagnosed and uncertain about what lies ahead of them?
Probably just trying to, it's so hard, because you feel you just got to try and, as a lot of the girls have said, just go with what works for you. We had my first daughter in the spiker cast, so we used to put a boomerang pillow around that she laid on, and then we put another pillow coming out, so it was like a T, so her legs could be, so she didn't have pressure, because then you have things like, oh, is she going to get pressure sores? We're so far away from the hospital, all these little things. Are they cold? Are they, a towel under the legs like we do with Maggie now. She's in a rhino brace to sleep. So we put a little towel under her knees like in a U, which just takes the pressure of the brace digging in the back. But we're lucky that she's a good sleeper. We have the problem when the brace comes off in the day that she just refuses to nap. So
yeah, okay. So it's actually a lot easier, it sounds like, to sleep.
I like her to
in the brace. Ellie, have you found, I know you're quite new in your journey, have you found so far many brands that have products supporting hip dysplasia in the market and what you've been looking for so far?
Just generally, not sleep related?
It's both. Both would be good to know.
There's enough. There isn't. I would assume there'd be more, knowing the statistics that you rattled off earlier. I did a quick Google search and found 3 or 4 brands of sleep suits, and then Google search what's the best high chair and got the mock-up, like that'll do. I have to change everything, and so you look into all your play, car, feeding, sleeping. That's really what we do. The Facebook page helped with sort of adaptations and things. So after I'd spent all that money on a high chair, I looked down the page of the Facebook thing and saw that you could adapt different kinds of high chairs and adapt different car seats, which we've had to hire from the hospital. Sleep, there seems to be a few, but choice is always pleasant. Always a good thing to have variety. But that's it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Claire, Peter mentioned that, with having to come out of swaddle quite early, didn't like arms up, so the left to dream swaddle didn't work. Yeah. Did you find with Harry you had to make compromises in any areas surrounding sleep or in general because there weren't products readily available?
Yeah, it was, look, it's tricky because he's gone through 2 different braces and a cast, all through different seasons. So trying to have some sort of consistency didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know how to answer it, to be honest, because didn't matter what I put him into sleep. We found everything was just quite difficult, and I just wish that there was some consistency. So in the times where Harry wasn't braced, we always used the Ergo Pouch Cocoon swaddles, and they worked beautifully, we loved them, and then would go back into a brace, or would have our operation and have a cast. And then in those times, I didn't have anything that was relatable to the ergo pouch, if that makes sense. Whereas now, having a pouch, I can keep that consistency. And Harry really associated his ergo pouches with sleep. So when he would be braced, I wouldn't be able to use that pouch, and so he would get frustrated because he's like, where's my sleeping bag? So yeah, that I can't really answer that question very well, but I hope that helped.
No, I think that's really insightful, actually. And just having, if it's not a straightforward journey for you, if it's if there are going to be ups and downs and different braces and casts and whatnot, that you need a consistent, need something consistent in the routine to see them through all those changes. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay. I guess just throwing it out to the group. Are there any other tips or tricks, any advice that you would want to offer parents who are newly diagnosed with the road ahead of them? Feel free to chime in.
Definitely join the Facebook group. That's a big one that the first week and a half, that has been my saviour. Talking to friends. You'd be surprised who knows who. And I've spoken to a couple of random people around Australia who have given me some insights on how to survive those weeks. That's helped me.
The only thing I can think of as well is being mindful of plagiocephaly, so flat spots on the back of babies' heads. So Harry was really restricted in his Pavlik harness, so developed a flat spot at the back. So for his day sleeps, we used a little pillow, which is also not really recommended by SIDS. So that was also a bit stressful, but just being mindful of that, because that wasn't pointed out to us when we had the Pavlik harness fitted. So I didn't know, I was trying to, first time mum, I've got a brace being put on, and mastering the breastfeeding, and then you totally forget about things like flat spots. And I didn't want to have a baby in a brace and then worry that he might end up also being in a harness as well. I mean, a harness, a helmet.
Yes. Yeah, that's a lot to take on. No, that's good. Jess, what about you? You're quite recently diagnosed as well. Is there any, having been through it so recently, is there any advice you would give families who are kind of just finding out about DDA?
I mean, I've researched everything I could find online, but it's definitely trusting your instinct. So what works for you and what works for the baby is what needs to happen. And also, I don't know about everyone else, but where I live is very cold down in Warrnambool. So knee-high socks and leg warmers were our best friend, and still are at this point, because she can't wear pants. So
absolutely,
I just want to say too, to some of the other mums that are still in the brace, and obviously Giselle's been different because she was only braced for 5 months and was fortunate not to have surgery. But don't worry about them reaching all their milestones about crawling and walking and pulling themselves up. I think when I've gone on that Facebook group, I did find it really helpful for the practical tips, but I also found it quite stressful, because some people would say things like, my baby's not doing this, my baby's not doing that, when are they going to walk? And you already have so much to deal with, and there's a lot of pressure. So try not to worry. They are so resilient. And I found with Giselle that, as ridiculous as it seems, it's almost like the bracing never happened. It's a distant memory. And now that she's been out of it for 4 months, she's not walking, but that's okay. She will go at her own pace. And I think that there's so much pressure on you already. So just relax. They'll be doing the things they need to do when they're ready.
That's wonderful advice. Thanks, Peter. And I guess what today has shown us is that even within the journey of developmental dysplasia of the hip, the experience is so vast and can differ so much from child to child. So, we often talk about there's no rule book for parenting and sleep in general, but it also sounds like the experience wearing a brace or a cast can also just be so different from child to child. So, I think that's brilliant advice, Peter. My fellow Ergo Pouch colleagues, are there any additional questions you'd like to ask, or ask any of the participants to elaborate on?
I just wanted to ask, when you guys are talking about the Facebook group, which groups did you find the most helpful?
Oh, I think it's like the Hip Dysplasia Australia. I don't have any, someone else come in.
Yeah, Hip Dysplasia Australia, and there's also Spiker Families Australia for babies who have had an operation and they're in a spiker cast.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Before we close, would anyone like to make any other comments? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. I can't even tell you how invaluable this has been, both just understanding the journey you've been on, going through, but also, I guess, how that's kind of made you feel, and what, you know, the wider community can do to support families through this. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best on your ongoing journey. I'm excited. As I mentioned earlier, we've just launched our range of hip harness, swaddles and bags, but I really feel like we're kind of just starting on this journey too. So I'm really excited on how Ergo Pouch can continue to evolve to help families such as yours. And we wish you all the best for your journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.